If you're wondering how to navigate difficult relationships, communicate more skillfully, regulate your nervous system in the midst of conflict, and set fierce boundaries that heal and empower, you are in the right place. You belong, right here where you already are. I'm your host, Dr. Cindy, and I invite you to grab a cup of tea and your favorite blanket and rest as you join me on this journey home to yourself. Welcome back to the Welcome You podcast. Today we'll be talking about enabling and how you can pull yourself out of habitual enabling dynamics, what enabling looks like, and how damaging it can be in a relationship. So I'll start with just a little story. I was talking to my parents, and my parents are elderly. They're in a retirement community and they're in their 80s. My mom is declining on the spectrum of dementia. She has what they call mild cognitive decline, but at this point, it is severe enough that she does not always recognize people in photographs who are directly related to her, and she has trouble remembering, what day of the week it is, and she gets very anxious about things. And my father is really trying the best he can to support her and to stay calm and grounded and not to get frustrated. But he does lose his patience sometimes. He does the best he can, and he's always been a very patient man. But when it's asked over and over again, he does sometimes get a little snappy, and he also struggles a little bit with finding the time to be able to rest without being disturbed, because she doesn't have this kind of long-term capacity to make space or to recognize that he is resting. So she will continuously knock on his door to check on him and make sure he's okay. And he does find it hard to get any kind of space or rest at all. So this is the landscape that my parents are in. My mom has been a drinker for a while, not necessarily like an over drinker or an alcoholic where she likes to get drunk, but she does enjoy tequila and she likes to sip on good tequila. So when the dementia started to worsen, this became quite a problem because there were these bottles of tequila in the cabinet, and she would serve herself some and then not remember that she had had some, and then go back and serve herself some more. And as you can imagine, this would lead to drinking too much and becoming quite intoxicated. And for a petite 85-year-old woman, this can be pretty problematic. So my dad called me one day and he said, Cindy, the funniest thing happened. Your mom likes to have some tequila from time to time, but she doesn't remember that she had it. So she went down to play bingo with her friends, and she had a drink before she left. And then when she was down there at the bar, she had another one and another one. And after about half an hour, I heard a knock on the door. And I went and answered the door, and there was Barbara in her wheelchair. And she was completely unconscious because she had drank too much. And her friends down at bingo had brought her back. They had found a wheelchair so that they could push her back. And they had brought her back drunk. And now he was the one who was going out and buying the tequila. And he said, I'm an enabler and I can't help myself. She asks me to get tequila, so I go and I get the tequila. But I wonder whether or not I should keep doing that. And I said to him, now, Dad, just because you have been an enabler in the past and because you want to please people and do what they would like for you so that you can make them happy. Just because that's how it's been in the past, you don't have to continue that behavior if it's harmful. So watching mom go through dementia and recognizing that we can't have tequila in the house, because if it's here in the cabinet, she's going to drink too much of it because she doesn't have that cognitive ability to recognize that she's had some. And so he had to really admit to himself that going out and buying the tequila was creating more of a problem. And this is kind of a silly example in some ways of the damage that enabling can cause. And, you would think, why on earth would he go out and buy the tequila? Well, my father, he loves to help people. And he's always been one of these folks who, with his church, he'll work with homeless people and he'll take them to the grocery store and get them something to eat and take them in under his wing. And he's gotten in trouble a few times. He'll find them in the baking aisle drinking the vanilla extract because it has a little bit of alcohol in it. And he has had to start to recognize that there are some ways that he can certainly help, but that over helping or putting people in a position where they can engage in habitual harmful behaviors is actually not helping at all. So, for me in my own life, this has been something that I've struggled with for a really long time, especially in my relationship to my ex husband. I too am a people pleaser and I want people to be happy. That's really kind of all I want when it really comes down to it is I want to help people find happiness and peace. And this is a really tricky territory. For a long time in my relationship with my ex, even before we were married, I took on the responsibility for his emotional well-being. And because I could make him feel better and because I could help in the beginning, that became what I was hooked into in this dynamic. So he would show up depressed, drunk, not feeling good about himself, and I would give him all of the reasons why he was worth loving, make him feel better with soothing touch and with caring words. And we would talk for hours and hours in circles about how to improve his mental health and how to build this self esteem in him. And ultimately, by the time we were a few hours in, I think maybe out of sheer exhaustion, he would kind of give in and, say, yeah, you're right. Yeah, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. But I'm still depressed and I'm still worthless and my life is a mess and it's not worth living. And these kinds of things were very, very painful for me to hear because I loved him. So in our marriage, I ended up enabling by continuing to engage in these long drawn out discussions and also by drinking relatively regularly. And we would also smoke a lot of weed. So we were kind of caught in this cycle of addiction together. And before I started spending a lot of time with him, I didn't have as much of a tendency to drink habitually. And getting into that relationship and being in that relationship, it seemed like alcohol, wine in particular for us, was how we could connect and relax and find comfort and ease with each other. So the wine and also the weed, the marijuana, became a part of how we supported each other in calming our nervous system and in regulating together, but it wasn't a real regulation. It wasn't real balance. It was kind of a perceived sense of balance and ease that was alcohol and THC induced. So, without those substances, as you can imagine, things became pretty unstable. Or he got into more of a chemical addiction. He liked to drink whiskey, and that really got the better of him. And he would also get these 12 packs of light beer, and he associated kind of this in the flow mind state and getting a project done with drinking light beer. And so that also quickly became problematic. And, eventually our marriage imploded, and alcohol was a big part of that, but also this kind of crippling enabling that was happening from me because my role was really to carry his emotional weight. And I really made it up to me to make him happy. And when I couldn't make him happy after years and years of exhausting myself trying to do that, it became very taxing on my system. And we just reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore. Now, I wish the divorce had been the end of that enabling dynamic. And you may be aware, if you are familiar with kind of the cycle of emotional abuse, that the people who are attracted to enablers tend to be on the narcissistic spectrum. And so this actually magnified after our divorce. And I wanted more than anything, even in our divorce, for it to be peaceful, for us to not to have to spend huge amounts of money and time and energy going to court and battling. I wanted it to be friendly and amicable in our separation. So that meant that I again compromised myself and enabled his narcissism by not fighting for what I should have fought for, by letting him off the hook for not paying child support for many, many years. And in those first few years after our divorce, he lived in a number of different places. He had this endless stream of roommates that were always around my young daughter, and that made me quite nervous. He was perpetually mentally unstable, so texting me, emailing me, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes and blog posts, the digital communication was quite aggressive, with a lot of blaming me for his inability to make ends meet or to have stable housing, and really making it clear through all of his communications that it was my fault. He also had this story in his head that I was trying to keep our daughter away from him. And every time he would send me a message that indicated that he was unwell, that he did not have the capacity to adhere to our parenting agreement or to pick our daughter up the way we had agreed upon, what I would respond with was, well, okay, I think it's best if she stays with me then. And I would cancel my plans and I would do what I needed to do to take the burden off of him. And this would enrage him. I thought that what I was doing was helping and saying, okay, you're telling me that you can't do it. I'll do it. I'll take it. Don't worry about it. And then because he had this narrative in his head that I was trying to keep our daughter from him, he would then spin off into this whole, like, how dare you keep her away from me? I'm more of a father than my father was, and all of these things. I mean, it would just kind of devolve really, really quickly into this incredibly violent blaming and shaming of me. And this was very, very overwhelming for me because at that point I couldn't even imagine how can I send my daughter to this person who's showing up on my phone and in my email as a raving lunatic who's not living in reality. And he would send an apology, usually the day that he was supposed to pick her up or the day before, and recognize that he had been not functioning from a place of stability and awareness. And then we'd go through this whole up and down cycle again, where now he's picked up my daughter and we have this kind of tense interaction as the exchange is happening. And then for the time that he is with her, I'm over here by myself, kind of unstable and worrying. And he would often continue to lash out at me somewhat aggressively while she was with him. And then that would make me even more nervous. So the time that I spent that could have been, my free time or my downtime was often spent with a lot of intrusive thoughts and worry and rumination. And then she would come back to me, and again, the interaction and the exchange would be relatively tense. And then in the evening and the days following her time with her dad, she would have quite a bit of somatic reaction to readjusting to my house, and seemed like she came back from his house sick every single time. And this doesn't surprise me, knowing what I know about how our bodies manifest our deeper psycho-emotional states. And so I would be kind of stuck in this position of now she's home, but I'm having to nurse her back to health. And it was this continuous up and down cycle that was just utterly, utterly exhausting. And so she's a bit older now. She's 10 years old, and she's been able to handle these back and forth transitions with a little bit more stability and regulation. He also has been living in the same place for a couple of years. But it's been challenging over these past couple of months because he has decided to move away. We are in a very rural area and it's difficult to make ends meet here. And he's kind of reached the end of his rope with his ability to financially make ends meet. And so we reached this implosion point a couple of months ago, and I've spoken about this on the podcast a few times, where I finally recognized that I needed to step out of the communication and that my contributions, my adding in information about my opinions and my wishes and my fears was actually really perpetuating the cycle of abuse. And I didn't see how much I was enabling, even when I finally decided to block all communication and to get my daughter her own phone and to turn that responsibility of communicating with her father over to her. But now that it's been a couple of months since I've really interacted with him, a couple of things are happening, which is really, really interesting. One is it's been the most peaceful couple of months of my life since I met him. And this comes with a lot of sadness, just to say this, because I really do feel a sense of finally being free from having to navigate this continuous upheaval, which has been such a challenge for me. And I didn't really realize how trapped and how locked in I was until experiencing this felt sense of freedom. The second thing that's happened, and again, my communication with him is none at this point. So I have limited information. But what I see, because I'm not getting the texts and emails about how poorly he's doing, what I see is that actually, without my involvement in his life, he has been able to make his own decisions for his own well being. And he seems to be doing somewhat better. And he seems to be also experiencing this level of freedom and release from this perpetual dynamic. And so, what I think I have to recognize, and this has been a really challenging pill to swallow. What I think I have to recognize is that by trying to help, I was keeping the cycle of abuse going. And I was actually causing harm by taking away his freedom to be responsible for his own emotional well being. As long as I was interjecting and inserting my opinions and my own mental health coping skills into his life, he didn't have the space or the capacity to develop his own in a way that was nourishing and supportive for him. Now, I don't really know whether he has done this for himself, but from what I'm gathering from the reports that my daughter is bringing me when I ask her, "How's your dad doing?" I think he seems to be also enjoying one of the most peaceful and free periods of his life since he met me. Yeah. So, enabling is this really tricky landscape. First, in order to stop this cycle, first you have to become aware that you're doing it. And in order to bring that awareness to your experience, you have to be willing to look at some hard truths about yourself, especially if you are a kind of peacemaker in your family, or you've always held the belief that your role is to take care of others around you and to do for them what they don't seem to be able to do for themselves. And this comes from a very young place. For me, it comes from a very, very early belief that I was nourishing to my family. I was adopted when I was 1.5. And when I came into my adoptive parents' lives, I think my resilience, my ability to bounce back from that upheaval and that transition was a source of nourishment for them. And they also, not being able to have kids of their own, they also found that having me come into their life was joyful. When I was 7, I had a brother and sister who were adopted from El Salvador. And when they came along, this really changed the dynamic in our household. Both of them, but my brother more significantly than my sister, both of them had experienced pretty severe trauma. And this showed up in our childhood as a lot of dysregulation and explosiveness and chaos. There was a lot of yelling, there was fighting. And this was very different dynamic than what I had experienced for those first 7 years of my life. So, what my role became first as the oldest kid, but also as the one with the least amount of trauma and dysregulation, my role became to be the one that nobody had to worry about because I was okay over there on my own. I was getting good grades. I was resilient. So from the outside, it appeared that I was relatively happy and well. And that allowed the attention to go to my brother and sister, who were the ones who really needed it the most. So, from a very young age, I became accustomed to setting my needs aside both so that I could be a source of nourishment for my parents and so that others could be taken care of. And this becomes a habit deep in our systems. And it also becomes a strategy that we use to get seen and to get known. So, in taking a back seat and being the quiet one who didn't need attention to be okay, that meant that I had to find a way to be seen in another way. So, what I ended up doing is I ended up pouring all of this energy into academic achievement. And getting good grades became the way that I was acknowledged. So here we have this real kind of double edged sword. I am keeping quiet about my own emotional needs, and I'm also working really hard to show that I don't need help. And this is really kind of a classic setup for being the enabler in an enabler or empath narcissist dynamic. So, as I navigated my marriage and my divorce, this heavy, heavy weight that I was carrying started to show up as really crippling pain in my body. I experienced a lot of back pain, and in somatic psychotherapy, and any kind of somatic awareness, you can certainly make a link between back pain and carrying too much weight. And ironically, after I divorced my ex, I started losing weight. And yes, I was exercising, and yes, I was eating differently, but I also emotionally wasn't carrying as much of the weight of another person, which made a huge difference in my mental health. And that actually allowed me to shed, I shed nearly 100 pounds, which is about the weight of a person. So I lost the weight of a person. And this is really significant because chronic pain, even, chronic fatigue syndrome, these are signals that our body is sending us that we're carrying too much emotional weight. So I didn't see this in myself. I didn't see how I was participating until after I was out of the situation. And I needed years of therapy and doing a lot of deep inner work to be able to start to unburden myself. And I had to say to myself over and over again that his mental health is not my responsibility. His emotional well being is not my job. That's his own responsibility. And I need to set him free to develop that for himself. Nobody can do that for you. You can't make someone happy. Happiness takes effort and action, and people need to do what they need to do for themselves to achieve good mental health, stability, regulation, and happiness. It even took me more years of knowing about the enabler dynamic and knowing that I was participating to really fully extract myself and be willing to stop, because in my psyche, in my subconscious mind, being the one who takes care of other people's feelings was my job. And so this is like a survival strategy for my nervous system. And so it's so deeply habituated in my system that it happens outside of my awareness. And so the littlest interactions, even if I thought it was harmless, the littlest interactions were contributing to the dynamic. So I used to be really astonished when I would reach out with a simple logistical question, and I would receive this barrage of accusations in response. And now I think, having had a couple of months of no contact with this person and having experienced both on my own side the tremendous relief and witnessed, from what I see, his developing freedom in my absence. I'm finally really getting a handle on how much I participated in this dynamic. So, noticing is the first big step, and this may be very painful for you to notice. So, I want to offer you some skills that you can use to navigate big emotions here as they arise. If you start to recognize that you have been contributing to a harmful dynamic that has caused damage in your relationship, or even if you're a parent, it most likely has trickled down to your relationship with your children, whether that's, you know, anger or being short tempered with them, or whether it's enabling them to not have the capacity to take care of themselves, it can be very painful to recognize. So, when you become aware that this enabling tendency is a part of your orientation to how the world works, you might notice that there's this belief that in order to receive love, I need to take care of others. Noticing this. And so bring attention as you notice that this is true for you. Bring attention down into your body if you're willing, and feel the physical sensations of what this feels like to acknowledge that you have participated in the pain that has been ongoing for some time. And just notice those sensations. So you might notice a heaviness in your chest. You might notice a sense of unease in your belly. There may be sadness. There might be a slumping of your shoulders. There might be a feeling of total exhaustion. See if you can just make some contact with this felt experience of the weight that you've been carrying. And if it helps, I invite you to just bring a hand to your heart or to your belly or to a part of the body that feels supportive, and just offering yourself this kind of gentle, supportive touch, and letting yourself know it's okay. It's okay. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. And now that I see this part of me that's been working really hard to take care of others, now I can start to invite this part of me to rest and to not have to do so much, not have to work so hard. So, as you bring this loving awareness to this hardworking part, see if there are some words that your hand has for your heart or for your belly, or maybe that your heart wants to say to your hand. It might just be, hold me close. Let your own attention be a gift to yourself in this moment. It's about time that you turned that loving attention, that caregiving, towards yourself. And allow yourself, as best you can, to have some waves of emotion that come and go with this. See if you can notice the impulse to enable others, and then pause for a moment and redirect that kind, caring, loving, caregiving attention towards yourself, because chances are you need it. Chances are you feel pretty exhausted, and it's been a while since you've taken the time to really give yourself the gift of your own attention. So, first, we have to notice that we're engaging in the behavior. Second, we have to pause and become aware of the impulse to enable and to help others. And then we have to shift our attention down into the body. Feel what that feels like. Be with the sensations as they come and go. Build this capacity to surf the urge to enable. And in slowing down in this way, hopefully what that will give you is a little bit of space to put a different possibility on the map. And this different possibility is, how can I best take care of myself given what's arising? How can I best care for myself, knowing that what I want so badly right now is to jump in and help, and that might not be helpful to this other person? So the other person may also be in the habit of being enabled, and they may continue to come to you expecting you to carry their emotional burden or to take care of them or to pay their rent or to offer them a session, a therapeutic session, as if you're their therapist. My ex still comes to me and says, I'd really like to have a talk. And what this means, I've had to really step back and bring some awareness to it to learn this. But what this means is he needs a therapist and he wants to talk at me and unburden himself and load it onto me. And I'm no longer willing to participate in that because I see that it is not helpful to him. It hurts me, and it continues to perpetuate this negative cycle of negative feedback in our relationship, where it just folds over on itself and creates more conflict. So, as much as I would love, in my heart of hearts, as much as I would love to sit and listen to him and to connect with him and to feel that good feeling, that dopamine release of helping him feel better, I can't say yes to that conversation. So you're going to have to set a boundary here. And this can feel like aggressive. It can feel unkind when you do this. But trust me when I say that in the end, it is one of the greatest acts of kindness you can offer, both to yourself and to the other person. So, how can you set this boundary with kindness? I want to offer here some tools from nonviolent communication. So, nonviolent communication was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, and there's a wonderful book I've mentioned before by a man named Oren J. Sofer called Say What You Mean. And I highly recommend that you read this book. However, when you set a boundary like this in a enabling context, when you say no to continuing the cycle of enabling, you may need to do it quite firmly and without giving the other person a chance to react or respond. It may need to be very, very definitive. So, in my case, what I needed to do was I really needed to cut off all communication. And so, nonviolent communication is kind of based on this framework that underneath of our feelings, underneath of our emotions, is a need that we're trying to get met. And once we identify what that need is, we can make a request. And so, underneath of my feelings of frustration and overwhelm and anger is a need for peace, safety, and autonomy and freedom for myself. Underneath of my ex's aggression, anger, and behaviors is a need to be seen and to be known and to be heard. Now, this is where I have to set a boundary because it's not my job to be the one who sees him. It's not my job to hear him. It's not my job to know him. He needs to get that need met somewhere else. So he keeps coming at me with this request, albeit a violent request: see me, hear me, know me, understand me. And this is where I have to draw a line in the sand because his need does not match up with my need for peace and safety and well being. So I need to prioritize my needs for myself, and I need to firmly and fiercely commit to what's needed to achieve that goal. So I need peace, safety, and freedom from abusive text messages and digital communication. Therefore, I am no longer willing to receive messages from you. So, what I had to do was I had to send him kind of a final email letting him know this, letting him know I recognize that participating in this harmful dynamic in this communication is not helpful because I need peace, safety, and freedom. I am no longer willing to receive communication from you. So, this language of what you're willing to participate in and what you're not willing to participate in is really important. I actually suggest that you make a list. So, you can use just a blank piece of paper and make a T chart. And on one side of the paper, write available for, and on the other side, write I'm not available for. And really, take some time to get clear on what you're willing to participate in and put those on the available side, and then what you're not willing to participate in. So, in terms of my ex, I am willing to have a face to face conversation that lasts a couple of minutes while my daughter is present to kind of keep us from spiraling into a negative dynamic. I am not willing to engage in digital communication. Period. Period. I cannot reiterate this enough. I can't even just unblock him for a minute to send a quick message about what time he's coming to pick up our daughter. I can't do it. I am not willing to do it. So that goes on the not available side of my paper. So here's my offering to you. Let all of this be an act of kindness, an act of generosity, an act of caregiving, but for yourself. Take some time to get really clear on what it is that you need. What need is underneath of your emotions? There are universal lists of human needs that are available if you use an internet search to look up nonviolent communication, feelings and needs list. And this can be really helpful because sometimes we're not even aware that we have a need that we're trying to get met. The final thing I'll say before I close today is that behaviors are attempts to get our needs met. So if you're engaged in a relationship with someone who has behaved in a way that you find to be violent or aggressive or unsafe, please know we can send some compassion to this wounded place here because that violence, that acting out, that lashing out in my ex-husband's case, this is a behavior that is an attempt to meet a need. And when I recognize this, that my ex's behaviors are an attempt to be seen and to be loved and to be known, then that softens me a little bit. So just like a sneeze is a symptom of a cold, his emails and text messages are symptoms of his longing, his loneliness. his inability to get that need to be seen met when he was a young child. So, what I can do is I can do a practice of loving kindness where I just send some kind wishes across time and space to that wounded part of him that didn't get what he needed. So I can just kind of hold this image of him as a young boy in my awareness as I just offer, may you be happy. May you be safe and protected. May you be peaceful. May you be free from worry. May you know that you are loved. May you be free from enmity. May no hatred fill your hearts. I would like to invite anyone who's listening right now who is experiencing any kind of challenge or relational struggle or just a question that you have around your relationship to yourself to please go ahead and give me a call. I love receiving your questions. You can call 719-759-9471 and leave an up to 3-minute voicemail sharing your story. And I encourage you to do this even if you aren't sure whether your story is relevant to anyone else, because one of the tendencies of survivors of relational trauma and emotional abuse is to minimalize their story and to believe that they're the only one experiencing this. As you move forward through the rest of your day, I would invite you, before you step away from this podcast, to just plan one thing that you're going to do today to take care of yourself. And that's for all of you listening. What is one thing that you can do before this day is over to send yourself the love and care that you deserve? And I look forward to welcoming you again next time you find your way to the Welcome You podcast. The Welcome You podcast is a production of Safe Within Wellness, an organization dedicated to supporting survivors of complex and systemic trauma in healing their wounds of belonging and thriving in relationship to themselves. Please help us keep our content ad-free and accessible to all by donating at safewithinwellness.com. Your presence and support matter more than you know.